Hey, hey, hey! Welcome back to Wisdom Hack, the channel where we don't just talk about life, we upgrade it. I'm so glad you're here today, because what we're about to explore together is something that could, and I mean genuinely could, change the entire course of your life. Not next year, not someday, starting today. Today's audiobook is called The Power of Reacting Wisely. Say that again with me. The power of reacting wisely. Now, I want you to think about this for just a second. How many times in your life have you said something in anger and wished you could take it back? How many relationships have cracked? How many opportunities have slipped through your fingers? How many sleepless nights have you had? Not because of what happened to you, but because of how you reacted to what happened to you. Yeah. Me too. We are not our circumstances. We are our responses. And that is the most powerful thing I could ever say to you. So get comfortable, grab something to drink, and let's go deep together. 10 chapters, 10 transformations. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The gap between stimulus and response. Between what happens to you and what you do about it, there is a gap, and in that gap lives your entire future. Most people never find that gap. Most people react on autopilot, like a car with no steering wheel, careening through life and wondering why they keep crashing into the same walls. But you listening to this right now, you are about to find that gap. And when you do, everything changes. There's a story they tell about Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to write one of the most powerful books ever put to paper. He watched people in the camps. He observed them in the most horrifying, dehumanizing conditions imaginable. And he noticed something that should have been impossible. Some people maintained their dignity. Some people kept their kindness. Some people, even in the shadow of death, chose to give their last piece of bread to a stranger. And he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Now let me be very clear about something. Viktor Frankl was not talking about toxic positivity. He was not saying, just think happy thoughts and your problems disappear. He was a scientist, a psychiatrist, a man who lost his wife, his parents, his brother in those camps. He wasn't selling a fantasy. He was pointing to something real, something biological, something psychological. Something that humans have access to that no other creature on Earth fully possesses. The ability to consciously choose our response. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your brain when something triggers you. Because understanding this, really getting it into your bones, is the foundation of everything in this book. Your brain has what scientists call the amygdala. Now, you've probably heard of this. It's sometimes called the lizard brain or the emotional brain. It sits deep in the center of your skull, and its job, its entire evolutionary purpose, is to keep you alive. When it senses a threat, real or perceived, it fires like a rocket. Cortisol floods your system, adrenaline surges, your heart rate spikes, blood rushes to your muscles, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, planning, empathy, and wise decision-making, essentially goes offline. In neuroscience, they call this an amygdala hijack.
Coined by psychologist Daniel Goleman, an amygdala hijack is what happens when your emotional brain completely overrides your thinking brain. And here's what makes it so sneaky. It feels completely justified in the moment. When it's happening, you are absolutely certain that your reaction is proportionate and necessary. Your boss gives you critical feedback in front of your colleagues. Hijack. Your partner says something that touches an old wound. Hijack. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Hijack. You get a passive-aggressive text from your mother-in-law. Hijack. And in that hijacked state, you say the thing you can't unsay. You send the email you can't unsend. You make the decision that derails everything you've been building. But here's the beautiful part. Here's the part that changes everything. You are not your amygdala. You have a prefrontal cortex. You have the capacity to pause. You have the ability to create what Viktor Frankl called the gap, that space between stimulus and response. And with the right training, with the right awareness, with the right tools that we're going to give you in this book, you can make that gap bigger. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was a high school football coach. Brilliant guy. Loved his players like his own sons. But Marcus had a temper. When his team was losing, when players made mistakes, when the referee made a bad call, Marcus would lose it. Screaming on the sideline, throwing his clipboard, saying things he didn't mean to kids who were already feeling bad enough about themselves. His players feared him more than they respected him. His win-loss record was decent, but his player retention was terrible. Kids transferred, parents complained. The school board was watching. And then one day, Marcus's teenage son sat across from him at the dinner table and said, very quietly, "Dad, I don't want to play for you anymore." That was the moment that cracked Marcus open.
He didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking at his son's face, and for the first time in maybe years, he saw himself through someone else's eyes, and what he saw terrified him. Marcus started therapy. He started reading about emotional intelligence. He came across the concept of the gap, the space between what happens and how you respond, and he committed to practicing it. It wasn't easy. The first month, he still blew up twice, but he caught himself faster. He apologized. He explained to his players what he was working on, which, by the way, earned him more respect than all his victories combined. By the end of that year, Marcus's team had a better record, better morale, and he'd had his son come back to play for him. Not because he became perfect, but because he learned to use the gap. Now, how do you actually create this gap in real life? Let me give you the foundational technique. The technique is called the stop practice. Simple, powerful, and you can use it anywhere. S. Stop. The moment you notice a strong reaction rising in you, just stop. Don't speak, don't act, just freeze for a single breath. T. Take a breath. Inhale slowly through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 2, exhale through your mouth for 6. This is not just a relaxation trick. This deep, controlled breath actually signals your parasympathetic nervous system to pump the brakes on the amygdala response. It is physiologically resetting your brain. O. Observe. What are you feeling right now? Not what happened. What are you feeling? Name it. Is it anger, fear, hurt, embarrassment, shame, Research by UCLA neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman shows that simply labeling an emotion, putting a word to it, reduces the amygdala's activity. Your rational brain literally gets more space to operate. P. Proceed with intention. Now that you've stopped, breathed, and observed, you choose. You decide. Not from your wound, not from your fear, not from your autopilot, but from your values. Who do you want to be in this moment? What response aligns with the person you're becoming? That's the gap. Stop, breathe, observe, proceed. It sounds simple. I know it sounds simple. And some of you are already thinking, sure, but you don't know my mother-in-law, or you haven't met my boss, or you don't understand the pressure I'm under. And you're right. I don't know your specific situation. But I know this. The situations that feel most impossible to pause in are the exact situations where pausing matters most. Let me tell you something about Navy SEALs. Because when it comes to performing under pressure, these men and women are operating in conditions most of us will never experience. Combat, freezing water, sleep deprivation, life and death decisions made in seconds. And what do they train first? Not shooting, not swimming, not fighting. Breath control. Because the SEAL instructors know something fundamental. If you cannot control your breath, you cannot control your mind. And if you cannot control your mind, no amount of physical training will save you when everything goes wrong. Now, you are not going into combat, but you are going into board meetings where your ideas get shot down. You are going into relationships where old wounds get pressed. You are going into financial crises that feel like emergencies even when they aren't. You are going into parenting moments that will shape little human beings forever. You deserve to be trained. Not trained to suppress what you feel, but trained to respond to what you feel with wisdom instead of impulse. The gap is not weakness. The gap is mastery. There's a reason that across virtually every wisdom tradition in human history, from the Stoics to the Buddhists to the Taoists to the indigenous elders of every continent, the advice converges on the same point. The quality of your life is determined not by what happens, but by how you meet what happens. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was himself a slave before becoming one of Rome's greatest teachers, put it plainly. Men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things. The Buddha said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." And the great Tao Te Ching simply says, "In dwelling, be close to the land. In meditation, go deep in the heart. In dealing with others, be gentle and kind." The gap is not a new idea. It's the oldest idea. It's the idea that separates those who are driven by life from those who are driving their lives. And the magnificent thing? It can be learned. It can be practiced. It can become as natural to you as tying your shoes. But it takes commitment. It takes the willingness to catch yourself again and again and choose again, better each time. So here is your challenge, starting today. For the next 24 hours, every time you feel a strong emotional reaction rising in you, just try to catch the wave before it crashes. Just try to create 1 second of space, 1 breath, 1 pause. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be slightly more aware than you were yesterday. Because wisdom doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives 1 gap at a time. That's chapter 1. Are you still with me? Good. Let's keep going, because it gets deeper and it gets better. And by the time we're done today, you're going to have a completely different relationship with your own reactions. Chapter 2. The stories we tell ourselves. Bold, dynamic. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Most of the time, you're not reacting to what actually happened. You're reacting to the story you made up about what happened. And the terrifying part? The story feels completely real. It feels like fact, but it's fiction. And the good news, the incredible news, is that if you can change the story, you can change everything. Let me paint you a picture. It's Monday morning. You walk into the office. You pass your colleague Jennifer in the hallway. You smile at her. She doesn't smile back. She looks straight ahead, stone-faced, and keeps walking. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What happens in your brain in the next 30 seconds? If you're like most people, a story starts writing itself. Jennifer is upset with me. Or, Jennifer doesn't like me. Or, what did I do? Or, she's always been like this, so passive-aggressive. Or, maybe she told the boss something about my project. And then, here's the really fascinating part. That story starts generating emotions. You feel anxious, or offended, or hurt, or indignant. And those emotions start influencing your behavior. You become curt in the morning meeting. You don't collaborate with Jennifer on the project the way you should. You go home and tell your partner, "I had the worst day. Jennifer completely ignored me." But what if Jennifer was up all night with a sick child and could barely hold herself together that morning? What if she had just gotten devastating news about a family member? What if she literally didn't see you because she was so deep in her own head? You reacted to a story, not to reality. Psychologists call this process appraisal. Every experience we have passes through an interpretive filter before it becomes an emotion. We don't feel first and think second. We appraise first, feel second. And our appraisals are shaped by everything we've ever experienced. Your history, your wounds, your beliefs about yourself and others, your culture, your family. The messages you received as a child about whether the world is safe or dangerous, whether people are trustworthy or deceptive, whether you are worthy of love or you have to earn it. All of that invisible programming runs in the background like an operating system, shaping every story you tell yourself about every event in your life. Here's one of mine, and I'm sharing this because I think a lot of you are going to recognize it. When I was younger, I had a pattern. If someone I cared about was quiet or seemed withdrawn, I immediately assumed it was about me. I assumed I had done something wrong. I would spiral into anxiety, trying to figure out what I'd said or done to cause their mood, and then either bend over backward to fix it or pull away in self-protection. The story was, someone's unhappiness is always somehow connected to me. Now, where does a story like that come from? For me, it came from growing up in a household where the emotional climate was unpredictable, where adult moods did sometimes mean something for me, where staying alert to other people's emotional states was actually a survival skill. As a child, that story made sense. It was adaptive. It kept me safe. As an adult, carrying that story into every relationship was destroying me. This is the thing about our stories. They don't update automatically. They get written in childhood, often in very understandable response to real circumstances, and then they just keep running, decades later, in contexts where they no longer apply. The story says danger when there is no danger. The story says you're not enough when you are more than enough. The story says they're going to leave when they're just having a bad day. And here's the critical thing. As long as the story runs unchallenged, it drives your reactions. You are on autopilot. You are a character in someone else's script, specifically the script written by your younger, wounded self. But you can become the author instead of the character. Let me introduce you to what researchers call cognitive reappraisal. This is one of the most well-studied and most powerful emotional regulation strategies in psychology. And unlike suppression, where you push feelings down and pretend they don't exist, Reappraisal works by changing the meaning you assign to a situation before the emotion fully takes hold. It is, in essence, rewriting the story. Here's how it works in practice. Let's go back to Jennifer in the hallway. Old story, automatic. Jennifer ignored me. She's upset with me, or she doesn't respect me. Reappraisal questions, and these are the magic. You ask yourself, is this the only possible explanation for what I observed? What else might be going on for Jennifer right now that has nothing to do with me? What would I need to know to be sure this is about me? If my best friend described this situation, what would I tell them? And then you generate alternative stories. Not fake, not Pollyanna, but genuinely possible alternatives. Jennifer might be dealing with something hard today. Jennifer might not have noticed me. Jennifer might have been distracted. Now, here's what reappraisal is not. It's not about making excuses for bad behavior. If Jennifer consistently treats you disrespectfully, that's different. That's a pattern that needs to be addressed directly. Reappraisal doesn't mean letting people walk all over you while you smile and tell yourself they must be having a hard day. Reappraisal is about refusing to let your imagination write horror stories based on incomplete information. It's the difference between responding to what is actually happening and reacting to what you fear might be happening. Story. I want to tell you about a concept from the work of Byron Katie called the work. Byron Katie is a woman who experienced severe depression for about a decade. She describes being so depressed that she barely left her bedroom for 3 years. And then, one morning, she woke up in what she describes as a state of joy and clarity, and she began to examine the thoughts and stories she had believed were true. She developed a simple process of questioning stories, and it goes like this. Take a painful story, a thought you believe is making you miserable, and ask it 4 questions. 1. Is it true? 2. Can you absolutely know it's true? 3. How do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? 4. Who would you be without that thought? And then turn it around. Find 3 genuine, specific examples where the opposite of your story might be just as true. This process sounds simple, but the results can be profound because it forces your brain to question what it has accepted as unquestionable fact. He doesn't respect me. Is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? What if the opposite were true? What if, in many ways, he does respect you, and your brain has been filtering for evidence of disrespect while ignoring the rest? The philosopher William James, one of the founding fathers of American psychology, made a distinction between live options and dead in our thinking. A live option is one that genuinely feels possible to you. A dead option is one your mind has already closed. When we're caught in a painful story, our minds close off the live options. They go tunnel vision on one interpretation and defend it like a fortress. The practice of reappraisal is the practice of keeping options alive, of staying curious instead of going certain, of saying, I wonder what's really going on here, instead of, I know exactly what this means. There's a concept in Zen Buddhism called beginner's mind. The idea is that the expert's mind has few possibilities. It thinks it already knows. But the beginner's mind is full of possibilities. It sees everything fresh. When we react wisely, we are practicing beginner's mind. We are approaching even the familiar situations in our lives, our marriages, our workplaces, our relationships with our children, as if for the first time, open to the possibility that what we're seeing might not be the whole picture. Let me give you some specific story patterns to watch for. These are the most common narratives that drive unwise reactions, and I want you to recognize them when they show up. The always/never story. She always does this. He never listens. These absolute words are almost always fiction. They collapse complex humans into cartoon characters and set up expectations that guarantee frustration. The they should story. She should know better. He should have figured that out by now. They should understand how I feel. When reality doesn't match your should, you suffer. But your should is just your preference, not a law of the universe. The catastrophe story. This is terrible. This is going to ruin everything. I can never recover from this. When we catastrophize, we amplify the emotional charge of a situation far beyond what it actually warrants. The discomfort is real. The catastrophe is invented. The mind-reading story. I know what they're thinking. I know what their intentions were. No, you don't. You might make educated guesses, but reading minds is not in the human skill set. When we act on our mind reading, we're acting on imagination. The I'm uniquely flawed story. There's something wrong with me. Normal people don't struggle with this. If they knew the real me, they'd leave. This story is possibly the most damaging of all, and also among the most universally held. Here's the thing about that last one. The irony is breathtaking. Almost everyone I've ever met carries some version of the story that they are uniquely broken, that other people have it together and they don't, that if anyone knew the full truth of their inner life, they'd be rejected. And because everyone carries this story and hides it, we never get to see that we are all hiding the same thing. We are all secretly convinced we're the most messed up person in the room. But we're not. We're humans. Beautifully, messily, magnificently human. So here is the invitation for Chapter 2. Become a story detective in your own mind. Not a harsh critic, not a skeptic who dismisses every feeling as invalid, but a genuinely curious investigator who asks, is this story I'm telling myself actually true? Or is it just the first interpretation my brain grabbed onto? Because the quality of your reactions is directly tied to the quality of your stories. And you have the power, the genuine human power, to tell better stories. Stories that open rather than close. Stories that invite curiosity rather than confirm fear. Stories that position you as someone navigating a complex world rather than someone being attacked by a hostile one. You are the author. Pick up the pen. Chapter 3. Emotional Intelligence, your greatest leadership tool. What if I told you that IQ, the thing we've spent a century measuring, sorting, and celebrating, accounts for less than 25% of success in life? What if I told you that the factor that predicts your success in your career, your marriage, your health, and your happiness, more than any intelligence test ever could, is something you can develop at any age? That factor is emotional intelligence. And by the end of this chapter, you'll understand exactly why it matters and how to grow it. In Better in 75, a science journalist named Daniel Goleman published a book that would change the way the world thought about intelligence. The book was called Emotional Intelligence, and it argued something radical for its time: that our ability to understand, manage, and respond to emotions, both our own and other people's, was not just a nice-to-have personality trait. It was a fundamental competency. A form of intelligence that predicted life outcomes just as powerfully, perhaps more powerfully, than academic intelligence. The book became one of the best-selling books of the decade, not because people read it and thought, interesting theory, but because people read it and thought, oh my God, this explains everything. Think about the smartest people you've ever known, the ones who were undeniably brilliant, the straight-A students, the people who could explain quantum physics over dinner, the ones with multiple degrees and off-the-charts IQs. Now think about whether those same people were the most successful. Not just in their careers, but in their lives, in their relationships, in their ability to lead, to influence, to inspire, to connect. In many cases, not all, but many, the answer is no. Some of the most intellectually gifted people you know might also be socially awkward, emotionally volatile, interpersonally difficult. They might be brilliant at solving abstract problems and completely terrible at navigating a conflict with their spouse. Why is that? Because intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence are different skill sets. They involve different parts of the brain. They develop through different experiences, and they serve different functions. IQ helps you analyze information, solve technical problems, and think logically. It is necessary and valuable. Nobody's disputing that. But life is not primarily a logic problem. Life is a human problem. And human problems require human intelligence. The ability to read a room, regulate your own emotions, empathize with another person's perspective, navigate conflict skillfully, inspire others, and maintain relationships through difficulty. Goleman's model of emotional intelligence breaks it down into 5 core competencies. Let me walk you through all 5, and as I do, I want you to honestly assess yourself. Not harshly, just honestly. Number 1, self-awareness. This is the ability to recognize your own emotions as they're happening, to know what you're feeling, why you're likely feeling it, and how it's affecting your behavior. Self-awareness is the foundation. Without it, you can't build any of the other competencies. It's hard to manage something you can't see. How's your self-awareness? When you're in a difficult conversation, can you identify in real time what you're feeling? Can you notice when your emotional state is starting to hijack your thinking? Do you know your triggers, the specific situations, words, tones, or circumstances that tend to set you off? If you're not sure, here's a clue. The things that bother you most in other people are usually the things you're least willing to see in yourself. Psychologists call this projection. The colleague who annoys you with his arrogance, do you have some arrogance you're not owning? The friend whose neediness exhausts you, are you secretly afraid of your own needs?
I'm not saying this to be harsh. I'm saying it because this is one of the fastest paths to self-awareness. Paying attention to your strongest reactions to other people. Moving forward, building. Number 2, self-regulation. This is what we started exploring in Chapter 1. The ability to manage your emotional responses rather than be driven by them. Not suppressing them, managing them. Self-regulation means that when you feel the surge of anger, you don't automatically discharge it onto whoever is nearest. It means that when anxiety rises, you don't default to your most comforting but least productive coping behavior. It means that you can sit with discomfort long enough to make a wise choice about what to do with it. People with high self-regulation tend to be trusted. They create psychological safety around them. People know that they won't explode unpredictably, won't lash out under stress, won't say something cruel and then pretend it didn't happen. And that quality, that reliability, is extraordinarily attractive to employers, friends, romantic partners, and collaborators. I want to talk about something real here. Self-regulation is not the same as being emotionally flat. I have met people who confused emotional intelligence with emotional suppression, who thought being regulated meant being robotic, cold, never showing feeling. That is the opposite of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence means feeling deeply and expressing appropriately. It means being able to say, I am really upset right now, and I need a few minutes before I can respond well, rather than either erupting or shutting down.
It means crying when something is genuinely sad without being ashamed of tears. It means letting people see that you care, while still choosing how that care gets expressed. Number 3, motivation. In Goleman's framework, emotional intelligence includes what he calls intrinsic motivation, the drive to pursue goals not primarily for external rewards, but for the inner satisfaction of the pursuit itself. People with this quality tend to have what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. They believe that their abilities can be developed through dedication and effort. They see failure as information, not indictment. Number 4, empathy. And this one is my favorite, because I think it might be the most powerful of all 5. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy says, I feel sorry for you. Empathy says, I understand what you're going through because I'm willing to feel it with you. Sympathy stands on the outside, looking in. Empathy steps inside. And that distinction, that willingness to genuinely enter someone else's experience, is what makes human connection possible. It's what turns a manager into a leader, a conversation into a relationship, a transaction into a moment of real meaning. There's a beautiful study that came out of research into what makes therapy effective. Across hundreds of studies, across different therapeutic modalities, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, group therapy, all of it, the researchers kept looking for what actually creates healing in the client. And the answer wasn't the specific technique. It wasn't the particular theory the therapist believed in. The single most powerful predictor of therapeutic outcome was the quality of the relationship between therapist and client. And the quality of that relationship depended on the therapist's ability to make the client feel genuinely understood. Empathy is healing. Empathy is effective. Empathy is not a soft skill. It is an extraordinarily powerful human tool. Number 5, social skills. This final competency is where all the others come together. Social skills, the ability to build rapport, influence others effectively, manage conflict, collaborate, communicate clearly, and inspire, are the result of the first 4 competencies operating in your interactions with the world. Someone who is self-aware, self-regulated, motivated, and empathetic tends almost automatically to develop strong social skills. Not because they learn scripts or tricks, but because they are genuinely present with other people. They listen. They notice. They respond to the actual person in front of them, not to their assumptions about who that person is. And so how do you actually grow your emotional intelligence? Because that's the question, right? Knowing the theory is great, but what do you do with it on a Tuesday morning?
When your teenager slams a door in your face, or your client emails you with an unreasonable demand, or your partner says the one thing they know is going to get to you. Here are 3 practices that the research consistently supports. Practice 1, the emotion journal. Every day, just for 5 minutes, write down what emotions you experienced, what triggered them, and how you responded. Don't analyze, just record. Over weeks, patterns will emerge that you cannot see in the moment. You'll start to notice, oh, I consistently feel anxious when I have to present ideas in groups. Or, I always get defensive when I feel like I'm being criticized by authority figures. This is self-awareness being built in real time. Practice 2, the pause practice. This builds self-regulation. Before you respond to any emotionally charged message, a difficult email, a tense text conversation, a triggering comment, physically pause for a set period of time. For digital communication, that might mean a 24-hour rule. If you're upset, you don't send until the next day. For in-person conversations, it might be as simple as saying, "Give me a moment," before you respond.
Practice 3. The empathy exercise. Once a day, take someone you're in conflict with, or someone who just irritates you, and try to genuinely construct their experience. Not to excuse whatever they've done, but to understand what it might feel like to be them. What are their pressures? What are their fears? What are they trying to accomplish? What have they lost? This exercise is uncomfortable, especially for people who are genuinely in the right, but it is one of the most powerful practices for expanding emotional intelligence I know. Here is the truth about emotional intelligence. It is not a fixed trait. It is a learnable, growable skill set. Research has shown again and again that people can meaningfully increase their emotional intelligence through deliberate practice. It takes time. It takes commitment. It requires the willingness to sit with discomfort and stay curious about yourself. But the payoff is extraordinary. Leaders with high emotional intelligence create teams with higher performance, lower turnover, and more innovation. Couples with high emotional intelligence have more satisfying, more enduring relationships and recover from conflict faster. Parents with high emotional intelligence raise children with better mental health, stronger social skills, and greater resilience. And here's what I want you to really hear, because I think this is the most important thing I've said so far in this chapter. Emotional intelligence is not about being nice. It is not about being passive or accommodating or eternally patient. Emotionally intelligent people set boundaries. They have difficult conversations. They say hard truths. They refuse to tolerate disrespect. But they do all of it from a place of awareness and intention rather than reactivity and impulse. They choose how to act rather than being swept into acting by the force of their emotions. That is power. Real power. The kind that builds things that last. You are building that power right now, just by listening, just by being willing to examine these ideas honestly. Keep going. The next chapter is going to blow your mind. Chapter 4. Responding to conflict without losing yourself. Conflict is not the problem. Conflict is inevitable. It is the price of having opinions, values, and boundaries in a world full of other people who have their own. The problem is how we've been taught to handle it. Most of us learned to fight, flee, or freeze. But there is a fourth option, and it's the one that resolves conflicts without destroying relationships, defends your truth without attacking others, and allows you to walk away feeling like yourself. Let's talk about it. Grounded, matter of fact, then warming. I've sat in a lot of difficult conversations over the years. Arguments between colleagues that almost ended careers. Fights between partners that had the word divorce floating just under the surface. Family confrontations that had been decades in the making. I've been in some of those conversations as an observer, some as a participant, and some, if I'm being honest, as the problem. And the thing that strikes me, looking back across all of those experiences, is how rarely anyone came into those conversations thinking, I want to understand. Almost always, the unconscious agenda was, I want to win. I want to be heard. I want them to finally get it. And ironically, that agenda, the need to win, is exactly what ensures that nobody wins. Conflict researchers John Gottman and Robert Levinson spent decades studying couples in what became famous as the Love Lab, a laboratory at the University of Washington where couples would discuss their problems while being monitored for heart rate, facial expressions, and physiological stress markers. Gottman could predict, with extraordinary accuracy, which couples would divorce and which would stay together, just by watching a few minutes of conflict. And what distinguished the couples who made it? Not the absence of conflict. All the couples fought. The couples who stayed together fought just as much as the ones who divorced. What distinguished them was how they fought. 4 specific behaviors, which Gottman called the 4 horsemen, were the predictors of relationship death. Criticism. Not feedback, not concern, criticism. The difference is that feedback says, "I'm bothered by this specific behavior." Criticism says, "Something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person. You're so irresponsible. You never think about anyone but yourself." Attack the person, not the problem. Contempt. This is the most destructive of all 4. Contempt is criticism wrapped in superiority. Eye-rolling, mockery, name-calling, dismissiveness. It communicates, "I am better than you, and you are beneath my respect." Gottman found that contempt was the single greatest predictor of divorce. Defensiveness. This is the refusal to take any responsibility. When we're defensive, we respond to every concern with a counter-complaint, with justifications, with "yeah, but." We protect the ego at the cost of the relationship. Stonewalling. This is emotional shutdown. The wall goes up, the shutters close, and nothing gets in or out. Usually happens when someone reaches what Gottman calls flooding. They are so physiologically overwhelmed that their nervous system simply cannot stay in the conversation. Now, the beautiful thing about Gottman's research is that for every horseman, there's an antidote, an evidence-based behavioral alternative that can be learned and practiced. The antidote to criticism is gentle startup. Instead of, "You never listen to me," try, "I feel hurt when I'm talking and I don't feel heard. Can we figure out how to fix that?" Lead with how you feel. Be specific about the behavior, and end with a request, not a demand. The antidote to contempt is building a culture of appreciation. In your relationships, your workplace, your home, actively, consistently look for what is going right and name it. Not in a fake or performative way, but genuinely. "I really appreciated how you handled that situation. I noticed how hard you worked today. I admire your patience." Over time, a reservoir of positive regard builds that becomes a buffer in conflict. You are arguing with someone you fundamentally respect, not with someone you've already written off.
The antidote to defensiveness is taking responsibility, even partial responsibility. Even if you believe the other person is 80% wrong, you can own your 20%. "You're right, I did snap at you, and I'm sorry about that." This one act can completely disarm a conflict because it signals something crucial. I am not your enemy. I am willing to be honest about myself. And the antidote to stonewalling is self-soothing. When you are flooded, when your heart rate has gone above 100 beats per minute and your prefrontal cortex has gone offline, you need to take a genuine physiological break. Not storm off, not give someone the silent treatment, but say, "I care about resolving this, and right now I'm so overwhelmed that I can't think clearly. Can we take 20 minutes and come back to this?" And then, during those 20 minutes, do something genuinely calming. Walk, breathe, listen to music. Let your nervous system reset. I want to tell you about Elena and David. Married for 7 years, 2 kids, both working demanding jobs. They loved each other genuinely, but they had fallen into a pattern that was slowly killing their marriage. When they fought, which was increasingly often, the pattern went like this. David would bring up something that was bothering him, but he'd do it in a way that felt like an attack. "You never make time for us anymore. You're always on your phone." Elena would immediately defend herself. "I'm on my phone because I'm handling everything. The kids' schedules, the finances, all the things you don't deal with." Then David would go cold. He'd shut down and leave the room. Elena would follow, escalating. and it would end with both of them sleeping with their backs to each other, stewing in resentment. They weren't bad people. They weren't even bad partners at their core. They were bad at fighting. When they finally started working on their conflict patterns, the first thing they learned was something almost shockingly simple. They had to slow down. Not just in the argument itself, but in the moments leading up to it. They started having regular check-ins, not about problems, just about life. How are you doing? What are you carrying right now? What do you need from me this week? They built what relationship researchers call intimate knowledge of each other's inner world. And when they did have to address real issues, they practiced the soft startup, beginning with feelings rather than accusations, with specific behaviors rather than character attacks, with requests rather than demands. It wasn't perfect. Old habits run deep, but slowly the pattern shifted. And the most significant moment Elena described wasn't a dramatic breakthrough, it was a small one. She brought up a concern, and instead of going defensive, David said quietly, "You're right. I haven't been showing up the way you need me to. I'm sorry. Let's figure out what we can do differently." She told me she almost fell off her chair, because that one sentence, "You're right, I'm sorry, let's figure this out," did more for their relationship than 2 years of arguments ever had. There's a distinction I want to make here that I think is enormously important. There's a difference between defending your truth and defending your ego. Your truth is what you genuinely experienced, what you genuinely value, what you genuinely need. That is worth standing for. That is worth articulating clearly and firmly. Your ego is the part that needs to be right, the part that can't tolerate being wrong, the part that would rather win an argument than save a relationship, the part that competes in a conversation that isn't a competition. When we react unwisely in conflict, we are almost always defending ego, not truth. And the tragedy is that we can't feel the difference in the moment. Ego defense and truth defense feel exactly the same from the inside. Both feel righteous. Both feel justified. The question to ask yourself in the heat of conflict is, what am I actually protecting right now? My genuine needs and values, or my need to not be wrong? Let me give you a framework for navigating conflict that I call CLEAR. 5 steps, and they work whether you're in a business negotiation, a family argument, a difficult conversation with a friend, or a workplace dispute. C. Clarify your intention. Before you enter any difficult conversation, ask yourself, what do I actually want as an outcome here? Understanding? Resolution? Change? If your honest answer is, I want them to admit they were wrong, that's useful self-knowledge, because that outcome depends entirely on the other person's willingness, and you can't control it. Focus on what you can control.
Listen first. This is counterintuitive for most people in conflict, because we want to be heard. But the person who speaks second in a conflict often has more influence, because they've demonstrated that they were actually listening. Ask questions. Reflect back what you heard. What I'm hearing you say is that right? This is not weakness. This is strategy and compassion combined. E. Express your experience. Not, you did this, but I experienced this. The difference is not just semantic, it's neurological. You always criticize me triggers defensiveness. I feel criticized when this happens invites empathy. Share your inner experience. Vulnerability is not weakness in conflict. It is disarming. A. Acknowledge their perspective. Even if you disagree, even if you think they're completely wrong. I understand why you would see it that way. Doesn't mean you're right. It means you're human and your experience makes sense from where you're standing. This acknowledgement is remarkably powerful because it's so rare in conflict. R. Request, don't demand. I need you to change is a demand. I'd like to find a way that we can both feel is a request. Demands trigger resistance. Requests invite collaboration. Conflict, approached wisely,
is not a threat to relationships. It is actually the mechanism through which relationships deepen. Every time two people navigate a genuine disagreement and come out the other side with both their truth intact and their connection strengthened, they have built something real and durable. The couples, the teams, the families, the friendships that have lasted and thrived are not the ones who never fought. They are the ones who learned to fight well, to disagree with respect, to hold their ground without holding their hearts apart. You can be someone who makes conflict better instead of worse. You can be the person in the room who brings heat down instead of turning it up. You can be the person who finds the bridge when everyone else is burning them. That is a power that changes everything it touches.
Chapter 5. The Art of Not Taking Things Personally. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your colleague gets the promotion you wanted. A friend doesn't text back for 3 days. Your parent makes a comment about your life choices at Thanksgiving dinner. Here's the wild thing about all of those situations. None of them are about you. Not really. Not the way you think they are. And the day you truly internalize that, the day it moves from an idea in your head to a truth in your bones, you will experience a level of peace that most people never find. There is a book that I think everyone needs to read at least once. It's slim, barely 100 pages. A Mexican author named Don Miguel Ruiz wrote it based on the ancient Toltec wisdom tradition. It's called The 4 Agreements, and the second agreement is the one I want to focus on in this chapter. Don't take anything personally. 4 words. Devastatingly simple, impossibly hard to actually live. Because our brains are, by evolutionary design, meaning-making machines. We are wired to look for patterns, to interpret behavior, to connect what others do to our own sense of self. It's the same neural machinery that keeps us socially connected, that also makes us hypersensitive to every possible signal of rejection, criticism, or dismissal. Psychologists call this the personal fable, a cognitive tendency, especially strong in adolescence but present throughout life, to believe that we are uniquely observed by others, that people are watching us, thinking about us, judging us, far more than they actually are. Related to this is what David Dunning and Thomas Gilovich documented in their research on what they called the spotlight effect. They did an experiment where they had college students walk into a room wearing a t-shirt with an embarrassing image on it. The students consistently estimated that about 50% of the people in the room would notice their shirt. When the researchers actually asked the people in the room, only about 25% had noticed. We massively overestimate how much other people are paying attention to us. And here's the flip side of that. The things people do and say, even when they're directed at us, are overwhelmingly about them, about their fears, their wounds, their values, their bad day, their unresolved history, their insecurity, their unmet needs. When your mother makes a critical comment about your weight, it is almost certainly not about your weight. It's about her anxiety, her own relationship with body image, her fear for you, her need to feel useful or connected, her own history with her mother. When a stranger is rude to you online, it has nothing to do with you as a person. It has everything to do with their pain, their frustration, their boredom, their loneliness, their need to feel powerful in a world where they feel powerless. When a colleague takes credit for your work, it says something very specific about their insecurity, their desperation, their character, not about your worth. There's a story I heard from a therapist friend of mine. I'll change the details to protect privacy. About a woman named Sarah who had spent most of her adult life in a quiet war with her father. Her father was critical, not constantly, not cruelly, but consistently. Nothing was ever quite good enough.
Her grades, her career choices, her husband, her parenting. There was always a raised eyebrow, a slight note of disappointment. Sarah carried this like a stone in her chest. She had interpreted her father's criticism as evidence that she was fundamentally inadequate. It wasn't until her father was in his late 70s, in a vulnerable conversation late one evening, that he revealed something she hadn't known. He had grown up in a household where love was entirely conditional on achievement, where his own father had communicated that you were only as worthy as your accomplishments. He had spent his entire life feeling like he wasn't enough, and in his fumbling, broken way, his criticisms of Sarah were his attempt to push her to avoid the pain of inadequacy that he himself had never escaped.
He didn't criticize her because she was lacking. He criticized her because he was wounded, because it was the only language of love he'd ever been taught. Now, I want to be careful here. Understanding the source of someone's behavior doesn't mean tolerating it without limit. Sarah still needed her father to treat her with more respect. That conversation was actually the beginning of a more honest relationship between them. But the shift in understanding, the movement from his criticism means I'm inadequate to his criticism is an expression of his own wound, changed Sarah from the inside. She stopped taking it personally. And when she stopped taking it personally, she stopped reacting defensively. And when she stopped reacting defensively, real conversation finally became possible. Don Miguel Ruiz writes, "What others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering." Immune, not indifferent. There's a crucial distinction. Indifference says, I don't care what you think. Immunity says, I understand that what you think is shaped by forces that have nothing to do with my actual worth, and I don't need to be disturbed by it. Indifference closes the heart. Immunity protects it while keeping it open. So, how do you actually practice not taking things personally? Because this is one of those principles that's easy to agree with intellectually and incredibly hard to live in the moment someone says something that stings. Here are 4 concrete practices. Practice 1. The projection check. The next time something someone does or says bothers you, ask, what does this tell me about them? Not in a dismissive or superior way, but genuinely curious. What pain, what fear, what need, what wound might be driving this behavior? You don't have to announce this. Just ask it internally. The question itself will shift your experience. Practice 2. The motive investigation. Ask yourself, what do I actually know versus what am I assuming about the intention behind this? Most of the time, we assume negative or hostile intent without any real evidence. She said that to make me feel bad. Did she? Or did she just say it? Checking our attribution of motive is one of the most powerful ways to stop personalizing. Practice 3. The self-source practice. This one is longer term and deeper. Start developing what psychologists call an internal locus of evaluation, the ability to know your own worth from the inside rather than deriving it from external approval or protection. This means building a relationship with your own values, your own standards, your own sense of integrity that doesn't depend on others' validation. When your worth is inside you, other people's opinions become interesting information, not verdicts. Practice 4. The compassion reframe. When someone behaves in a way that triggers you, try this. This person is also doing their best with what they have. They are also carrying something. They also have fears and wounds that shape how they show up. You don't have to like their behavior, but viewing them through a lens of shared humanity rather than as a threat or an adversary takes the personal charge out of the interaction. Here's the deepest version of this idea, and it comes from the Buddhist tradition.
There is a teaching about what's called the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain itself, the criticism, the rejection, the loss, the disappointment. The first arrow lands, and it hurts. You can't always control that. But the second arrow? The second arrow is the story you tell about the pain, the self-judgment, the rumination, the obsession with why it happened and what it means. Why does this always happen to me? What's wrong with me? I'll never be good enough. They don't respect me. Nothing I do matters. The second arrow is optional. It is not mandatory. It is something we do to ourselves. Not taking things personally is not about denying the first arrow. Sometimes first arrows are real and sharp, and they hurt. But it is absolutely about refusing to shoot yourself with the second one. I'll be real with you for a moment. This chapter, Don't Take Things Personally, is the one I have to revisit most often in my own life. Because I am a person who cares deeply about what I do and how I affect people. And caring deeply creates vulnerability to personalization.
When something I create is criticized, the first arrow lands. I feel it. And my very human brain immediately wants to grab the second arrow. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's not good enough. Maybe I should have done it differently. Maybe they don't like me. The practice I have to do, constantly, imperfectly, is to ask myself, what is actually true here? And the honest answer is almost always, someone had an experience different from what I intended. That's information. That's not a verdict on my worth. The people in this world who can move through criticism, rejection, disappointment, and conflict without losing their footing, without shrinking into shame or exploding into defensiveness, are not people who don't feel things. They feel everything. But they have built a foundation inside themselves that doesn't shake when the outside world goes sideways. And that foundation is built one practice, one pause, one moment of choosing the compassion frame over the personal frame at a time. You are not the target of the universe's criticism. Other people are not secretly conspiring to make your life harder. The rude driver, the dismissive colleague, the critical parent, the unavailable friend, they are all just doing what humans do, moving through their own complexity and, sometimes, imperfectly, bumping into yours. Take it less personally. Live more freely. Chapter 6. Mastering Your Triggers. Know yourself, change everything. What if your strongest reactions are actually a map? A map to the places inside you that still need healing. Most people see their triggers as problems, things that happen to them, things they need to avoid or suppress. But the wisest people in the world see triggers as teachers. They are breadcrumbs, leading you back to yourself. And in this chapter, I'm going to show you how to follow them. Let me ask you something. Is there a person in your life who can get under your skin faster than anyone else? Someone who, with a single sentence, a single look, a single gesture, can completely derail your emotional state? Almost everybody has someone like this. Often, and this is the fascinating part, it's someone we love. And here's the thing I want you to sit with. The intensity of the reaction is disproportionate to the actual event. The thing they do might be small, objectively small, but the reaction it produces in you is enormous, way too big for the moment. That disproportionality is the tell. It's the signal that this isn't really about them. Not entirely. It's about something older, something deeper, something that was set in motion long before this person ever entered your life. In trauma and psychology research, this is called emotional charge. Certain experiences, certain words, certain dynamics carry a charge that is much higher than their surface-level appearance would suggest. Because they are connected, often unconsciously, to earlier formative experiences. The child who was consistently told, "You're too sensitive," may have a hair-trigger reaction to any suggestion that their feelings are exaggerated, because that comment doesn't just land in the present,
it detonates in the past. The child who never felt truly seen or celebrated may react with enormous grief or rage when they're overlooked or uncredited as an adult, because it's not just about this moment, it's about all the moments that came before. The child who was never allowed to be angry may either suppress anger entirely, losing the important information and energy it carries, or may experience anger so intensely that they can't control it when it finally comes, because it arrives with decades of backup. Understanding your triggers is not about making excuses for your behavior. Oh, I was triggered, so what I did was okay. No. Understanding your triggers is about taking radical responsibility, because it allows you to see what's actually driving you, and then make a conscious choice about what you want to do with it. Ignorance of your triggers is not innocence. It's just unconsciousness. And unconscious reactions cause just as much damage as conscious ones. Let me give you a framework for working with triggers. I call it the TRACE method. T. Trigger. Name it specifically. When someone criticizes my work in front of others, I feel triggered. Be as specific as possible. When someone cancels plans at the last minute, is more useful than when I feel disrespected. The more specifically you can identify the trigger, the more power you have over it. R. Reaction. What do you do when it fires? Notice the full pattern. Is it anger, withdrawal, excessive apologizing, sarcasm, tears, physical symptoms, tight chest, clenched jaw, hollow stomach? Understanding your reaction pattern is crucial because the reaction often reveals the underlying belief or wound. A. Association. This is the deeper work. Ask yourself, when have I felt this way before? What earlier experience does this remind me of, even if only emotionally? You might not remember a specific event. Sometimes it's more of an emotional resonance than a clear memory. The point is to locate the roots of the reaction.
C. Core wound. Beneath every trigger is a belief about yourself, about the world, about what this event means. I'm not good enough. I'm not safe. I don't matter. I'll be abandoned. I'm not worthy of love unless I perform perfectly. Identifying the core wound is like finding the root of the weed. You can pull the leaves off 100 times, but until you get to the root, it keeps growing back. E. Evolution. Now you can ask, is this belief actually true? Is it serving me? Does it reflect my current reality, or is it a belief that made sense in a different time and place? This is where healing happens, not in the suppression of the trigger, but in the honest examination of what it's connected to. I want to tell you about Michael. Michael was a successful executive in his late 40s. Brilliant, respected, led a team of 60 people. But he had a problem that he could not seem to solve. In high-stakes meetings, when someone challenged his ideas or contradicted him publicly, Michael would go from 0 to defensive in about 3 seconds. His face would harden. His voice would flatten. He'd become sarcastic in a way that shut down conversation and intimidated people who were simply trying to contribute. He knew it was happening. He hated it. He'd tried to control it for years, but willpower alone wasn't working. When Michael finally did some deeper work, he traced the trigger back to something he hadn't thought about in decades. As a child, his father was a domineering man who publicly humiliated Michael when he was wrong about anything. Not occasionally, regularly. In front of siblings, extended family, anyone who was around. The message embedded through years of this experience was, being wrong is dangerous. Being challenged is an attack. You must defend your position at all costs, or you will be humiliated.
That little boy learned to defend himself as a survival strategy. And now, in a conference room full of adults who genuinely respected him, the little boy still thought he was fighting for his life. When Michael understood this, really understood it, not just intellectually, but in his body, something shifted. Because the question changed from, how do I control my reaction, to, how do I reassure this part of me that it's safe? He began, very literally, to pause in those moments of challenge and say to himself, silently, internally, this is not Dad. This is a colleague. I am safe. Being challenged is not an attack. It might even be useful. Over months, the reaction softened. Not because he suppressed it, but because the trigger lost some of its charge when he shone light on what it was connected to. This kind of inner work has a long and respected history in psychology. Carl Jung called it shadow work, the process of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness. What we cannot see, we cannot choose. What lives in shadow drives us. What we can see, we can work with. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability also touches this territory deeply. She found that people who are able to acknowledge and share their vulnerable underbelly, not indiscriminately, not to everyone, but in relationships of trust, those people have more authentic lives, more genuine connections, and, paradoxically, more real strength.
Because it takes more courage to acknowledge a wound than to armor over it. And that courage is what allows the wound to heal. Here are 3 specific practices for working with your triggers over time. The body scan. When you're feeling triggered, before you do or say anything, do a rapid scan of your body. Where are you holding tension? What's happening in your chest, your stomach, your shoulders, your jaw? The body holds the truth of what we're experiencing before the mind can even catch up. Learning to read your body is learning to read your emotional state in real time. The letter you'll never send. For deep, persistent triggers, especially those connected to specific people or experiences from your past, write a letter to the source of the wound. Don't hold back. Don't be diplomatic. Say everything you never got to say, everything you needed to say. Then don't send it. This practice gives voice to what has been voiceless without creating real-world damage. Many people find that the charge of certain triggers significantly reduces after this practice. The witness practice. Develop the ability to observe your triggered state without becoming it. This is what mindfulness teachers call metacognition, thinking about your thinking, observing your experience from a step removed. When you're triggered, try narrating it. I notice I'm feeling a surge of anger right now. I notice my body is tense. I notice my mind is telling me a story about what this means. This narration is not dissociation. It's the opposite. It's radical presence with your experience while maintaining the observer's chair. And from the observer's chair, you can choose. Your triggers are not your weakness. They are your map. Every strong reaction you have is pointing to something inside you that is asking for understanding, for healing, for a new story. Every hijack is an invitation, not to be ashamed, but to get curious. What would it mean to approach yourself with the same compassion you'd offer a child who was clearly reacting from a place of old fear? What would it look like to say to your triggered self, I see you, I understand why you're scared, and I'm going to help you see that you're actually safe now. That conversation, that internal compassion, is the beginning of real, lasting change. Not performance, not control, but genuine, deep, durable transformation. Know your triggers, trace them to their roots, bring light to the dark places, and watch yourself become more free with every step toward understanding. Chapter 7. The Wisdom of Slowing Down. Patience as a Superpower. We live in the era of instant messages, instant answers, instant gratification. And we have imported that impatience into our inner lives. We want to feel better instantly. We want problems resolved instantly. We want to know, right now, how it's all going to turn out. But wisdom has always lived in the unhurried. The most transformative decisions of your life need time. And patience, real patience, practiced patience, is not waiting. It is a form of profound trust. I want to start this chapter by doing something that might feel a little unusual. I'm going to ask you to just stop for a moment. If you can, close your eyes for 10 seconds. If you're driving or can't close your eyes, just let your gaze soften. And just breathe. One breath in, one breath out. Welcome back. What did you notice in that pause? Even a few seconds of stillness can feel almost foreign in a life that's running at the pace most of us maintain. Now imagine making decisions from that place. Imagine responding to challenges from that quality of inner stillness. Imagine the kinds of choices you'd make if, before any significant action, you took that breath. We have a productivity culture that has made busyness a virtue. We celebrate the hustle. We admire the person who never rests, who's always on, who responds to emails at midnight and has their phone out at the dinner table. We've built a world that treats slowness as laziness. But here's what the research actually says. Stanford psychologist Kelly McGonigal, in her work on willpower, found that the biggest enemy of good decision-making is not weakness or lack of motivation. It's exhaustion and hurry. When we are tired, rushed, or under pressure, the prefrontal cortex, remember, the rational, wise part of the brain, depletes its resources, and we default to the reactive, impulsive patterns of the amygdala. In other words, speed is the enemy of wisdom. There's a story from the Cherokee tradition about the two wolves. An elder is teaching his grandson about life. Inside each of us, he says, there is a battle between two wolves. One wolf is angry, jealous, resentful, greedy. The other wolf is peaceful, kind, compassionate, humble. The grandson thinks about this and then asks, "Which wolf wins?" The elder answers, "The one you feed." The wolf of impatience, the one that reacts immediately, that snaps, that makes decisions under pressure, that cannot tolerate uncertainty. That wolf is very easy to feed in our culture. Everything around us feeds it. The news feeds it. Social media feeds it. The culture of urgency feeds it. The wolf of patience, the one that breathes, that waits, that considers, that trusts the process, that wolf requires deliberate, conscious feeding. It does not survive on default. The ancient Greek philosophers had two words for time that we've collapsed into one in modern English. Chronos, clock time, sequential, measurable, the time of schedules and deadlines. And kairos, sacred time, opportune time, the right moment. The time when something is genuinely ready to happen.
Most of us live almost entirely in chronos. We try to force outcomes on our timeline. We try to accelerate processes that have their own inherent timing. We grow impatient with our healing, with our growth, with other people's growth, with life itself. And we make decisions at the wrong time, chronos time, when we should be waiting for kairos. Let me give you some very concrete ways that impatience damages the quality of our reactions. Reactive decisions. The decision made immediately after receiving bad news. The email fired off in the first flush of anger. The promise made in the height of emotion. The threat issued in frustration. These are almost never the decisions we'd make if we waited even 24 hours. Premature closure. Impatience makes us want to resolve uncertainty immediately, so we make a decision, sometimes any decision, just to end the discomfort of not knowing. But some situations genuinely need more information, more time, more space before the right move becomes clear. Forcing premature closure often means choosing wrong. Misread situations. When we're hurrying, we miss things. We read tone in text messages that isn't there. We interpret body language incorrectly. We miss the subtext in a conversation because we're already formulating our response instead of fully listening. Speed costs us accuracy. Relationship damage. Impulsive reactions, the angry word, the sarcastic comment, the dismissive gesture, done quickly, in the heat of the moment, can take months of patient work to repair. The few seconds it takes to make an unwise response can cost weeks of trust. So how do you cultivate patience? And I want to be specific here because be more patient is advice that helps almost nobody. First, practice tolerating discomfort in small doses, deliberately. If you always grab your phone the moment you feel bored, your tolerance for waiting has atrophied. Start rebuilding it intentionally. Wait in line without your phone. Sit with a question without immediately Googling the answer. Let a text sit for an hour before you respond. These small practices rebuild your capacity to tolerate the discomfort of not yet resolved. Second, develop what psychologists call future self-continuity. Research by psychologist Hal Hershfield shows that people who have a strong sense of connection to their future self, who can vividly imagine the person they'll be in 5 or 10 years, make better long-term decisions. They are less likely to sacrifice future well-being for immediate comfort. When you feel the pull of impatience, ask, what would the version of me in 10 years want me to do right now? Third, practice what meditation teachers call the pause before response. In conversation, get comfortable with silence before you speak. Let what you've just heard actually land. Let your mind process it genuinely before you open your mouth. Most people are so afraid of silence that they fill it instantly. But some of the wisest things ever said came from the person who waited just a beat longer before speaking. Abraham Lincoln was famous for writing what he called hot letters, fiery, angry missives he would compose when he was furious with a general or a politician. He would write the letters in full, every word, every accusation, every bit of rage, and then he would file them away, never sending them. When historians found these letters after his death, they were astonished. These letters were cutting. They were direct. They named exactly what Lincoln thought was wrong. But he never sent them, because he understood something essential. The purpose of writing the letter was to process the emotion, not to act on it. And by the time he had processed the emotion, he usually saw a wiser path forward. That practice, releasing the feeling without enacting it, is one of the oldest wisdom techniques in human history. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei is often translated as non-action or effortless action. But a more nuanced translation might be action that is in harmony with the natural timing of things. Not forcing, not pushing, not demanding that reality bend to your timeline.
This is not passivity. Wu Wei is not doing nothing. It is knowing when to act and when to wait. It is the farmer who knows you cannot make a plant grow faster by pulling it, but who also knows exactly when to plant, when to water, when to harvest. So much of our suffering comes from trying to harvest before things are ready. I want to talk about patience in the context of our own growth, because I think this is where most of us are most impatient with ourselves. We decide we want to change. We read the book. We listen to the podcast. We have the insight. And then we expect to be different, immediately. And when we react the old way again, when we snap at our kid or spiral into anxiety,
or make the same choice we've made 100 times before, we tell ourselves we haven't made progress, that we're not trying hard enough, that change isn't possible for us. But this is not how change works. Change is not a switch. Change is a process. A winding, non-linear spiral of a process where you make progress, then seem to regress, then find you're actually at a higher level than you were before. Neuroscience calls this the process of forming new neural pathways. Every time you choose a new response over an old reactive pattern, even imperfectly, even after you've already started the old response, you are laying down new neural architecture. You are literally building a new brain. But new pathways take repetition. They need practice. They need patient, consistent, compassionate repetition before they become automatic. So be patient with your process. Celebrate the tiny wins. Notice when you paused for 1 second longer than last time. Notice when you caught yourself mid-reaction and course-corrected. Notice when you said sorry before the other person asked for it. These are victories. These are evidence of change happening. Patience is not the absence of passion. The most passionate people I know, the ones who care most deeply about their work, their relationships, their growth, are also the ones who have learned to channel that passion through the filter of patience. Because passion without patience is a wildfire, beautiful, powerful, and impossible to direct. Patience gives passion its aim. It is the archer's steadiness that makes the arrow fly true. You have a life you want to live. You have a person you want to become. You have things you want to build and people you want to love and contributions you want to make. None of those things happen at the speed of impulse. All of them unfold in kairos, the sacred timing of things growing at their own right rate. Trust the pace. Feed the patient wolf, and watch your life become, slowly and surely, something extraordinary.
Chapter 8. Responding to failure, turning setbacks into setups. Every single person who has ever built something worth having has failed. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, catastrophically sometimes. And the one thing, the only thing that separated those who ultimately succeeded from those who ultimately quit is not talent, not connections, not luck. It's how they responded to failure. That response is a skill, and we're going to build it right now. Thomas Edison failed approximately 10,000 times before he successfully developed a working incandescent light bulb. When a reporter asked him how it felt to have failed 10,000 times, Edison reportedly said, "I have not failed 10,000 times. I have successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work." Now, I know you've heard some version of that story before. It's become a cliché of motivational culture. But I want to look at it more carefully because there is something genuinely significant happening in that reframe. Edison didn't suppress the information that his attempts had failed. He didn't tell himself the experiments were successes when they weren't. He didn't practice toxic positivity. He changed the category. He reclassified failure from evidence of inadequacy to data in a scientific process. That is cognitive reappraisal in its most elegant and practical form, and it's available to all of us. Let me tell you about the psychology of failure response, because this is where people diverge most dramatically, not in their initial experience of failure, but in what they do with it. Carol Dweck's research at Stanford introduced us to the concept of fixed versus growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, your abilities are static. You have a certain amount of talent, intelligence, or capability, and failure is evidence that you've reached your limit. Failure is threatening. Failure must be avoided, hidden, or explained away.
because if you fail, it means something terrible about who you fundamentally are. In a growth mindset, your abilities are developable. Failure is not evidence of a ceiling, it's feedback on the current level of your skill, information about what needs to be learned or practiced or tried differently next time. Failure is uncomfortable, sure, but it's not defining. It's informing. The research on this distinction is not soft. It's extraordinary. Children with growth mindset do better academically over time, recover from setbacks faster, are more willing to take on challenges, and show more resilience under pressure. Adults with growth mindset build more successful businesses, maintain better mental health through adversity, and describe greater overall satisfaction with their lives. And crucially, and this is the part I want you to really hear, mindset is not fixed. It can be cultivated. It can be shifted. Not just by trying to think positive thoughts, but by actively changing the stories we tell about our struggles. I want to tell you about J.K. Rowling, and I know everyone knows her story. But I want to tell it in a way you might not have heard it. In 1994, Rowling was a single mother living in a small apartment in Edinburgh, Scotland. She was clinically depressed. She had no job, barely enough money for food, and a manuscript for a children's book about a boy wizard that had been rejected by 12 different publishers. 12. She has spoken openly about this period being the lowest point of her life. There were moments, she has said, when she contemplated suicide. The failure felt absolute, comprehensive, and permanent.
But here's what she also said in her 2008 Harvard commencement address, one of the most powerful speeches I've ever read. She said, "Failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena I believed I truly belonged." She's not saying failure is good. She's not saying she's glad she suffered. She's saying that failure, responded to well, can become the very forge in which something great is shaped. That's not inevitable. Plenty of people fail and never find that forge. The difference is in the response. The willingness to stay in the fire long enough to be changed by it, rather than destroyed by it. Let me give you what I call the failure response protocol, a sequence of responses to significant failure that can make the difference between being defined by it and being developed by it. Step 1. Allow yourself to grieve. Failure hurts. Pretending it doesn't is not strength, it's avoidance. When something you worked for, something you cared about, doesn't work out, you are allowed to be devastated. You are allowed to be angry, sad, frustrated, disappointed. Sit with it. Don't rush it. Honor what the attempt meant to you. Grief for a loss, even a failed project, is appropriate and healthy. Step 2. Don't globalize. One of the most destructive failure responses is what psychologists call overgeneralization, taking one specific failure and turning it into a sweeping conclusion. I failed this becomes I always fail. This didn't work becomes I'm someone who doesn't succeed. Watch for the words always, never, everyone, no one. These are the verbal signatures of overgeneralization, and they are almost always lies. Step 3. Separate who you are from what you did. You failed at something. That is not the same as being a failure. The action, the result, the outcome, those are things you did or experienced. They are not you. Your worth as a human being is not up for review every time a project falls short. Step 4. Extract the learning. Ask, what specifically can I learn from this? What would I do differently? What did this experience reveal that I couldn't have seen without going through it?
Not in a punishing way, in a scientist's way. The scientist who runs a failed experiment doesn't conclude they're an incompetent scientist. They conclude they have more data now than they had before. Step 5. Get back in the arena. Theodore Roosevelt gave a speech in 1910 that included these words, made famous by Brené Brown. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Get back in the arena, not recklessly, not without learning, but with the scars as your credentials and the lessons as your new strategy. Every significant human achievement you have ever admired began with failure. The artist who kept painting through terrible work until the good work emerged. The athlete who lost seasons before winning championships. The scientist who disproved 100 hypotheses before confirming one. The entrepreneur who shut down 3 businesses before building the 4th one that changed everything.
Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the tuition for success. And the question is never whether you'll pay it. You will. We all do. The question is only what you get in exchange. Personal, vulnerable, then empowering. I want to tell you something honest. Some of my deepest failures, the ones that felt, at the time, like they were going to end me, became the roots of everything I'm most proud of today. Not because failing was secretly good, but because of who I had to become in order to keep going. Resilience is not a quality you're born with. It's a quality you build. You build it by going through hard things and surviving them, by discovering that you are more than the crisis you're in, by finding out that the thing that felt like it would break you didn't. You are already more resilient than you know. The evidence is that you're here. You're still here, still listening, still trying, still curious. That is resilience. Honor it. The wisest response to failure is not to pretend it didn't hurt. It's not to manufacture enthusiasm for the experience. It's not to tell yourself some story about how everything happens for a reason. The wisest response is to stay in the conversation with your own life. To refuse to let any single outcome write the final word. To know, in your bones, that this is not over. That the story is still being written. That the next chapter begins the moment you decide to turn the page. Turn the page. Chapter 9. Boundaries, Love, and the Wisdom of Saying No. Here's a truth that took me years to understand. No is not a rejection. No is a direction. When you say no to something that is wrong for you, you are saying yes to everything that is right. The inability to say no is not kindness. It is the slow erosion of the self. And the wisest, most loving people in your life will ultimately respect your boundaries more than they ever respected your inability to have them. Warm but direct. The love and the truth together. There's a word I want to introduce you to. Enmeshment. It comes from family systems therapy, and it describes a relationship dynamic where the boundaries between two people, emotionally, psychologically, energetically, have become so blurred that they can no longer tell clearly where one person ends and the other begins. Enmeshment looks like love on the surface. It looks like closeness, devotion, care. But it is fundamentally different from love, because genuine love requires the existence of two separate people. Two beings with their own inner lives, their own truths, their own needs. Love is a connection between distinct selves. Enmeshment is the dissolution of the self in the name of connection. And it is exhausting, confusing, and ultimately harmful to both people involved. The reason I'm starting here is because a lot of people who struggle with saying no, who take on too much, who can't disappoint people, who help to the point of depletion, often genuinely believe they're being loving. They believe that their helpfulness is care, that their self-sacrifice is devotion, that putting others first, always, is virtue. But there is a profound difference between genuine generosity and compulsive giving. Genuine generosity comes from abundance, from a full place inside yourself, from the genuine desire to contribute. You give from overflow. Compulsive giving comes from fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as selfish. You give from depletion, to manage someone else's feelings, to avoid an outcome you're afraid of. One leaves you feeling alive. One leaves you feeling resentful and empty, and often baffled that you feel that way, because you've been doing so much for everyone. Let me tell you about Rebecca. Rebecca was what people describe as the nicest person. Always available, always willing. If someone needed help, Rebecca was there. If someone needed her to take on extra work, she said yes. If her family needed her over the weekend, she showed up. If her friends needed a shoulder, she offered it. And Rebecca was miserable. Not on the outside. On the outside, she was cheerful, accommodating, reliable. But inside, she was exhausted and increasingly resentful. She felt invisible. She felt used, even though she'd never once asked the people in her life not to ask. She felt like she was disappearing, molecule by molecule, into everyone else's needs. What Rebecca didn't understand, what nobody had ever told her, was that her inability to say no wasn't about the people around her. They weren't actually demanding this of her. They were asking, as people do, for help and presence. But Rebecca experienced their needs as obligations she couldn't refuse. She experienced, "Can you help with this?" as, "You must say yes or something bad will happen." Where does that come from? For Rebecca, it came from a childhood in which love and approval were conditional, where saying no risked disappointing the parent whose approval she desperately needed, where her worth was tied to her usefulness. She learned at a very young age that to be loved meant to be needed, and to be needed meant to always be available. That strategy worked in childhood, in the sense that it got her what she needed to survive emotionally. But it came with her into adulthood and was slowly breaking her. The work Rebecca had to do, and it was genuinely courageous work, was to learn that she was allowed to have needs, that her needs were not burdensome or selfish, that saying no to one thing was not the same as rejecting a person, and that people who genuinely cared about her would not leave simply because she had a limit.
Boundaries are not walls. I want to say that clearly and emphatically, because this is one of the most common misconceptions I encounter. Walls keep everyone out. Walls are the reaction of someone who has been so hurt that they've decided closeness itself is the danger. Walls are isolation masquerading as protection. Boundaries are different. Boundaries are the lines that define where you end and where someone else begins. They are the terms under which you are willing to be in relationship. They don't keep people out. They create the conditions under which real intimacy is possible. Because without them, you're not in a relationship with the real you. You're in a relationship with the performance of you. Brené Brown says it perfectly. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. Let me give you a framework for setting boundaries that is clear, compassionate, and effective. The first thing to understand is that boundaries are about you, not the other person. A boundary is not, "You need to stop doing X." That's a demand, and demands create resistance. A boundary is, "I am not able to continue with X."
It's a statement about your own limits and choices, not an attempt to control someone else's behavior. This distinction matters enormously in practice. You need to stop criticizing me in front of people. Demand. I'm not willing to continue conversations where I'm being put down in public. Boundary. One is trying to change the other person. One is stating what you will and won't engage with. Here's a simple structure for stating a boundary. Step 1. Observe without judgment. State what you've observed, factually. I've noticed that our conversations frequently involve criticism of my choices. Step 2. State your feeling. I feel hurt and dismissed when this happens. Step 3. State the boundary clearly. I'm not able to continue this conversation when it takes that direction. Step 4. Offer the alternative. What I'd like is for us to be able to talk openly without the commentary on my decisions. Step 5. Name the consequence when necessary. If it continues, I'm going to need to step back from the conversation. Now, here's what you need to know about consequences. A consequence you name is a consequence you must be willing to follow through on. If you say, "If this keeps happening, I'm going to end the call," you need to actually end the call when it keeps happening. This is where many people falter. They state the boundary, the other person crosses it, and then nothing happens. Because following through feels too hard, too confrontational, too risky. But here's the thing. A boundary without a consequence is just a complaint. And repeated complaints without action train the other person that you don't mean what you say, and that they can continue exactly as before.
Following through on boundaries is not punishment. It's not manipulation. It's the simple, honest act of aligning your actions with your stated values. And it is one of the most powerful things you can do for the health of any relationship. What about the people who react badly when you set a boundary? And this is real. Some will. Some will be hurt. Some will be angry. Some will accuse you of being selfish, cold, difficult. Here's the painful truth. The people who react most strongly to your boundaries are often the people who have benefited most from your having none. Their reaction is not evidence that you were wrong to set the boundary. It is evidence of how much the old arrangement served them, and how much your growth challenges theirs. This doesn't mean they're bad people. Growth is hard. Having the mirror held up, having someone you care about suddenly claim space that used to be yours, is genuinely uncomfortable. But their discomfort is theirs to manage, and your boundaries are yours to maintain. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living without boundaries, not the physical exhaustion of a hard day's work, a soul-level exhaustion, the feeling of having given and given until you don't know who you are anymore, until you don't know what you actually want, because you've been focused on everyone else's wants for so long. And there is a particular kind of aliveness that comes from beginning to reclaim yourself, from saying, for the first time, "No, I can't do that," from experiencing the discomfort that follows and surviving it, from discovering that the relationship continued anyway, from finding out that the world didn't end and that you feel more yourself than you have in years. Boundaries are love. Stated clearly, held with warmth, without cruelty, they are one of the most loving things you can offer both yourself and the people around you, because they are the truth of who you are. And love without truth is not love. It is performance. It is comfort. It is peacekeeping. Love with truth? That's something worth building a life on. Chapter 10. A Life Lived Wisely. Integrating the Principles. We've covered a lot of ground today. 10 chapters. 10 layers of the same essential truth. And now, before you go, I want to bring all of it together. Because this is not a collection of separate ideas. This is one idea, seen from 10 angles. And that idea is this: you have more power over your life than you know. Not power over what happens, power over how you meet what happens. And the meeting
That is where your life is made. This is the crescendo. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp. Back to the idea that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our freedom, our power, our humanity at its most luminous. We've spent this entire book learning to find, widen, and live in that space. Let me remind you of everything we've gathered together today. Warm, celebratory, each point resonating. In Chapter 1, we learned about the gap, that critical space between what happens to us and what we do about it. We learned about the amygdala hijack, and we learned the stop practice. Stop, take a breath, observe, proceed with intention. We learned that the gap is not weakness. The gap is mastery. In Chapter 2, we discovered that most of the time we're not reacting to reality. We're reacting to the story we've made up about reality. We learned to be story detectives, to ask, is this actually true? To practice cognitive reappraisal, to question the always/never stories, the should stories, the catastrophe stories, the mind-reading stories that drive so much of our suffering. In Chapter 3, we built the case for emotional intelligence as the most important predictor of life success. Self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, social skills. We understood that EQ is not a personality trait. It is a learnable, growable set of competencies. And we got 3 practices to build them: the emotion journal, the pause practice, and the empathy exercise. In Chapter 4, we went into the territory of conflict. We met the 4 horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, and their antidotes. We learned the clear framework for navigating difficult conversations, and we drew the crucial distinction between defending our truth and defending our ego. Continuing the review, each chapter getting a moment to resonate. In Chapter 5, we took on one of the most liberating practices available to human beings: not taking things personally. We understood that what others do and say is a projection of their own inner reality. We learned the 4 practices: the projection check, the motive investigation, the self-source practice, and the compassion reframe. And we discovered the second arrow, the optional suffering we add to our pain with our stories about our pain. In Chapter 6, we dove into our triggers, those disproportionate, high-charge reactions that reveal the older wounds beneath them. We learned the trace method for working with triggers, and 3 practices for healing the underlying charge: the body scan, the letter you'll never send, and the witness practice. We understood that our triggers are not our weakness. They are our map. In Chapter 7, we slowed down. We made the case for patience as a superpower in a world that has made speed a virtue. We learned about Chronos and Kairos, clock time and sacred time. We got 3 practices: tolerating discomfort in small doses, developing future self-continuity, and practicing the pause before response. We understood that patience is not passive. It is the archer's steadiness that makes the arrow fly true. In Chapter 8, we confronted failure with open eyes. We learned the failure response protocol: grieve, don't globalize, separate identity from outcome, extract the learning, and get back in the arena. We understood that failure is not the opposite of success. It is the tuition for success. And we met J.K. Rowling and Thomas Edison and Viktor Frankl, and discovered that some of history's greatest achievements were forged in the fire of enormous failure. In Chapter 9, we talked about boundaries, love, and the wisdom of saying no. We distinguished enmeshment from love,
compulsive giving from genuine generosity, walls from boundaries. We got a 5-step structure for setting boundaries clearly and compassionately. And we understood the hardest truth, that the people who react most intensely to your boundaries are often the ones who have benefited most from your not having them.
10 chapters, 10 angles, 1 truth. The quality of your life, genuinely, measurably, permanently, is determined by the quality of your reactions. Deep and personal now. I want to tell you something that I believe with everything I have. And I want to say it to you personally, as if there were nobody else in the room. You are capable of so much more than you currently allow yourself to be. Not because you're not trying. You're clearly trying. You're here. You've listened this far. You're engaged. But there is a version of you, a you that lives consistently in the wisdom of the gap, that reacts from truth rather than fear, that meets conflict with clarity, that meets failure with curiosity, that meets others with empathy, and meets yourself with grace. That version of you is not a fantasy. That version of you is available. That version of you is actually closer than you think. Not light years away, not separated from you by years of therapy and meditation retreats and major life overhauls. It is separated from you by a breath, by a pause, by a question, by a practice, by one wiser choice made once in one ordinary moment, and then another and another. I want to be honest with you about something. Reading a book or listening to one is not transformation. You know that. I know that. We've all read books that inspired us and changed nothing in our actual lives because the inspiration never made it from our heads into our hands, into the actions of our ordinary days. So I want to end today not with more ideas, but with an invitation. An invitation to actually do something differently, starting today. Pick one practice from this book, just one. Don't try to implement all 10 chapters simultaneously. That is a recipe for overwhelm and eventual abandonment. Pick the one that resonated most strongly. The one that you kept nodding your head to. The one that you know, in your gut, is the thing you most need to work on right now. Maybe it's the stop practice, that simple 4-step pause before you react. Maybe it's the emotion journal, 5 minutes every day of honest inner accounting. Maybe it's one conversation you've been avoiding that needs to happen with kindness and a well-placed no. Maybe it's sitting with a failure you've been either punishing yourself for or running from, and asking it what it has to teach you. Whatever it is, write it down right now. Actually, physically write down what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and what getting it right looks like. Because that is how ideas become lives. That is how listening becomes living. The closing meditation of the book. You cannot step in the same river twice. The river is always moving. The water you touched a moment ago is already downstream. You too are always moving. You are not the same person who pressed play on this audiobook. Not because you've had some magical transformation, but because you have taken in new information, new perspectives, new possibilities that have already begun to rearrange something inside you. You are a river, and rivers change the landscape they flow through. Reacting wisely is not about becoming someone cold, calculating, and emotionally removed. It is not about having no feelings. It is not about being endlessly patient and never getting angry and always knowing the right thing to say. It is about becoming someone who can feel everything, really feel it, without armor, and still choose. Who can be moved without being swept away. Who can be challenged without being dismantled. Who can be hurt without retaliating. Who can be wrong without being destroyed. It is about becoming someone who trusts themselves enough to pause, to breathe, to ask, to wait, to choose, again and again, imperfectly and beautifully, the version of themselves they actually want to be. You have that in you. I promise you with everything I am, you have that in you. The capacity for wisdom is not reserved for the enlightened few. It is not a gift given to some and withheld from others. It is a muscle. It is a practice. It is a choice made moment by moment in the ordinary and extraordinary circumstances of one ordinary and extraordinary life. Your life, lived with eyes open, heart open, the gap found and chosen over and over until choosing it becomes who you are. That is the power of reacting wisely. That is your power. Now go use it. And that, my friends, is the power of reacting wisely. 10 chapters, a lifetime of practice waiting to begin. If this audiobook moved something in you today, if something landed differently, if you caught yourself nodding or maybe even got a little emotional, I want to know about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me which chapter hit hardest. Tell me which practice you're going to start with. Tell me what you're going to do differently because of what you heard today. Because here at Wisdom Hack, we are a community of people who are genuinely committed to growing. Not performing growth, actually doing the work. And you hearing this means you're one of us. If you got value from this today, and I believe you did, do me one favor. Share this with someone who needs it. You know who needs it. You're already thinking of their face right now. Send them this. You might be changing their life, and you won't even know it. Hit subscribe so you never miss a Wisdom Hack audiobook or deep dive. We drop new content weekly, all designed to take you deeper into the ideas that actually change how you live, not just how you think. I want to leave you with one last thought. Every single second of every single day, you are practicing something. You are practicing patience, or you are practicing reactivity. You are practicing empathy, or you are practicing judgment. You are practicing presence, or you are practicing avoidance. There is no neutral. There is only what you're practicing. Choose wisely. This is Wisdom Hack. I'll see you in the next one.